And now I get the wonderful opportunity to dive into this topic with Dr. Pamela Sullivan. We are going to be learning about supporting shared reading from birth to age 5. What a fun topic. And we have a wonderful presenter today. Her name is Dr. Pamela Sullivan, and she is a professor at the College of Education at James Madison University. Dr. Sullivan has been a special education teacher, a school psychologist, and a reading intervention coordinator. Her research focuses on early literacy, family literacy, technology, and the tools utilized to facilitate literacy skills, including curriculum, text, and technology. She supports a statewide and district initiatives such as standards of learning and curriculum reviews. I always enjoy learning about literacy, learning about reading. So without further delay, I am so excited to turn it over to Dr. Sullivan to share all of the goodness that she has. Welcome, Dr. Sullivan, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it so much. I enjoy every opportunity that I get to talk about family literacy practices. So as Terry let you know, in my career, I've been a professor, I've been a special education teacher, and most importantly for today's talk, I've been a school psychologist. So one of the areas that has always interested me is kids who struggle to learn to read. And because I've been a school psychologist, I tend to look at that from a systems approach and thinking about what are all the things that can go right to help this child learn to read in an easier, more manageable way. So when I think about shared reading within the area of family literacy, one of the things that I think about is helping those kids who might later struggle to learn to read to get an early start in developing some skills and developing some comfort level. So everything that I talk today is going to be within the frame of reference of helping those kids get an early start in reading and thinking about it from a systems approach. What sort of levers can we pull to help kids who would otherwise struggle to learn to read to learn a little bit easier? So we are going to look at this in terms of what do we know about shared reading, and we're going to limit our talk today to birth to age 5, and I'll talk about why we change up those ages in the way that we talk about shared reading as we go through. And we're going to talk about how do we move forward, what needs to continue to happen or what needs to start to happen, and what role do schools and communities play as we facilitate shared reading. So we're going to start with our definition of shared reading. And when we talk about shared reading, we are specifically talking about a dialogic reading approach. And this means that we are using the shared reading as a way for a parent and a child to have a conversation. And we're looking for an interaction with a book, and we're looking for that book to be the center of their frame of reference and the frame to wrap around the parent interacting with the child, encouraging their oral language, providing a language-rich context for the child, and it's all centered on a book. So the 3 principles are that we encourage child participation, which changes as the child changes developmentally. So that's where the age difference is going to come in. The parent providing feedback to the child. And then the reading adapted to the child's linguistic ability. So a developmentally appropriate book or setting for this shared reading. So functionally, that looks like a parent reading and discussing a book with a young child. In practice, that is going to provide the parent with a lot of opportunities to extend their child's language as they both focus on that experience of reading the book. It's going to give them an opportunity to restate what they think they're hearing, which is part of what a parent does to develop oral language. It is going to help them use unique and interesting vocabulary, and it's going to help them foster a shared viewpoint, which becomes really important later on as that child is learning to take someone else's perspective and zero in and concentrate on a book. So a lot of the social aspects of language and a lot of the beginnings of academic language development we can see in this early practice of dialogic shared reading. Now, when you are reading to a child who is a baby, some of their participation might be grabbing a hold of the book. It might be pointing, it might be babbling. We laugh in our household because a lot of the books that we read to our daughter are chewed up, they're ripped. She always wanted to know what was underneath the pages. And so chewing is accepted, grabbing the book is accepted, all of the baby behaviors that you would think of are accepted behavior during this time. It changes as the child changes. So if you're talking about a child who's toddler to pre-K age, you may be thinking a little bit more about emphasizing the story, right? Talking about the characters, talking about what you see in the pictures in the background, thinking about emphasizing that sense of story and that narrative comprehension that's going to come up later on. The reason that this talk is focusing only until age 5 is that when we talk about shared reading in grades 1 through 3, the emphasis for the parent's responsibility changes to supporting reading skills. And so at these ages, you're going to see a little more of the child reading to you, a little more emphasis perhaps on helping with decoding skills. But in the early ages, we talk about shared reading as really an oral language experience. And this is where the parent and the child are going to read and discuss a book, and they're going to use this time to have a really language-rich interaction that's centered on the book itself. So thinking about how often do these behaviors occur, this is a graph with longitudinal data, and it is looking at how many times, percentage of times, that a family member has read to a child age 3 to 5, so toddler and pre-K age, during 3 times a week or more. So what percentage of time do you read to your 3 to 5-year-old 3 times a week or more? And this, I think, shows some really interesting data. So when we look at this, the first thing that you'll notice is that there isn't just one line. We don't look just at the average. We are looking at this through what we call the medial variable of the mother's education level. And we do that because we know that the maternal education level within a family is a solid predictor of a lot of academic behaviors, not just shared reading, but a lot of other things as well. And it is one of the variables that actually shows you the differences in shared reading and how often that happens. So if you look at that bottom line, when the maternal education level is less than high school, you're going to see that this ranges from about 55% of the time to maybe about 70% of the time. And so that is for mothers who have less than a high school education level, that's the average for how often they're reading to their child 3 times a week or more. There's a fairly large jump when you get to the high school diploma or equivalent. And that data is going to be solidly 75% to about 83% of the time. The next level is going to be some college. And that raises up again about 85 to maybe 90% of the time. They're reading 3 times a week or more. And then the highest level is going to be at least a bachelor's degree. And you can see that that line varies from about 90% to about 95% of the time. So there's a couple interesting things about this. First of all, this data is from 1993 to 2019. So a long period of time. And one of the things that you'll notice is that it's not only interesting that the data breaks out pretty evenly by education level, but you can also see that the lower education levels are a little more variable than the higher education levels. So there's more variety in how often the reading occurs for those lower education levels. The other thing that I want you to note that we will come back to later on is that these trend lines essentially are flat. There isn't a lot of rise in the amount of activity, in the amount of shared reading that has happened between 1993 and 2019. Those lines are fairly static. So what we can tell from this graph is a couple of things. The mother's education level is an important mediating variable. The behavior itself varies quite a bit, even within education level. And the behavior is influenceable. In other words, you can change this behavior over time. Okay. So one of the things that we have to look at is how does shared reading facilitate future literacy skills? And we have been doing this work for decades. And one of the classic studies goes all the way back to 1995. And this was an attempt to take a group of smaller studies and use what we call the meta-analytic approach to see what the overall effect size is. So when you have a group of smaller studies that all look at the same shared concept, depending on how they measure it or the sample size that they may have different levels of effectiveness for an intervention. And a meta-analytic study takes all of those smaller studies and tries to get an overall effect size. And so this study in 1995 looked at shared reading before school age and found an overall effect size, and it was a medium effect size, so it was fairly robust. They found that shared reading increases oral language skills, and it increases future reading measures, which, remember, in 1995, we didn't measure reading all the time the same way that we do today. So we were probably looking at word recognition of words in isolation. We were probably looking at an overall oral reading score, and we might have been looking at letter sound knowledge. But at that time, we didn't have the depth of knowledge about phonological awareness and comprehension that we have today. So since that time, we've done updated studies, and they focus on literacy or language development. And what we've found very consistently is that shared reading increases receptive vocabulary for children. It increases reading comprehension, and it increases an internal motivation to read. And this is one that I find increasingly valuable as life goes on. And my child right now is a teenager, and everything she does, it seems like, is online. It's all digital. And yet, still, when life is overwhelming, she knows that to get rest, the best thing she can do is grab a book and go read. And I think about this internal motivation to read in terms of, yes, increasing schooling, but also for our kids, looking at their well-being, looking at the idea of rest. I think that's going to become increasingly important as we go more and more digital. So how does shared reading do this? How do we make these changes? And this is my fabulous slide with the brain. So I wanted to show you how the pathways activate. So in 2015, this study was done, and what they looked at was what's going on in kids' brains as they are participating in shared reading. So looking at the pathways, and we know that for kids, birth to about age 7 is the vocabulary time, right? It is the language development window for kids. We also know that infancy and toddlerhood, kids are having an explosion of neural connections in their brain, more than any other time other than adolescence in their life. Their neurons are firing and connecting. And so, what we found through looking at what's going on in the brain during shared reading is that shared reading helps the brain to light up these pathways, especially for language development and for semantic processing. So, what does that mean? That means it's actually helping kids with extraction of meaning. It's helping them to encode vocabulary into their brain, and it's helping them develop mental imagery, and it's helping them with their narrative comprehension. And so when I explain to my undergraduates what it means to have this neural explosion going on, what is it that's happening for the kids, and how does that help you as a person, we tend to use sports analogies or music analogies to talk through this. Thinking about all of those times if you played a musical instrument when you needed to play the scales, just to embed that sort of muscle memory, that neural pathway firing needs to become automatic, right? And you do that first by lighting up the pathway, but then also by pruning the extraneous connections. And this is what shared reading is doing for infants and toddlers. It is helping them light up those pathways for language development, and it's helping them to prune the extraneous light up so that they become more automatic with this. So it's a more efficient system. So this is a really neat way to look at what is the neurological mechanism through which these advantages occur when we're having shared reading. So a question that we get asked a lot in this area of research is shared reading simply more exposure to language? If what I'm developing is oral language and comprehension, could I simply talk to my child more? Could I simply sing with my child more? Would I get the same effects if I was just exposing them to more language? Is that all that shared reading is? And so for this, I will say the short answer is no. Shared reading does bring benefits that are beyond simple increases in exposure to language. We know that shared reading can mediate the vocabulary difference when we're talking about mothers with lower education levels. And part of this sort of will make sense if you think about books and the way that they're put together for little kids. If your book has the constraints of language, where there's a rhyming scheme, or where you're talking about zoo animals, you are automatically going to have to stretch as an author to find words that fit the rhyming scheme or that fit the zoo animals. And those words may not be words that we use on a daily basis. Keith Stanovich did this research in the 1990s and looked at the difficulty level of words, right? How unusual or unique is a word in a children's book? And what he found was that words within children's books are more unique than the everyday vocabulary that two college-age parents use to talk to each other. So you are going to use more unique vocabulary when you have a children's book. In addition to that, your child is going to develop a sense of story. All of the reading with the narrative storytelling is going to help them develop that comprehension. It's going to set up a schema for them about how stories work. Phonological awareness needs to be on here. It does help develop phonological awareness, but with the caveat that phonological awareness is on the lower end of what you're developing when you are sharing reading with kids. oral language, comprehension, motivation, concepts of print, those are all going to be higher levels. Phonological awareness, you almost have to limit it to rhyme or to letter sound correspondence if you are reading a lot of alphabet books. But it isn't necessarily going to be one of the biggest areas. So that's a question that's come in as our knowledge of reading has become more sophisticated, right? Can I foster phonological awareness skills through shared reading? And the answer is yes, if. And certainly not to the extent that we know that these other aspects are fostered. So the last point on here is one of my favorites, because empathy doesn't tend to be one of the things that we think about when we think about what we're fostering through shared reading. And yet, those neurological studies that I just talked about, those pathways in the brain, one of the things that we have seen through the research that you are doing for your child when you share reading with them is you are showing them how to take someone else's perspective. And you are showing them that two people can look at the same shared reference point and have a conversation about it. And that what they see and what you see might differ a little bit, but you can exchange views on it. And all of that is the basis of what we call intellectual empathy, which is the ability to perceive how other people see and experience things. And it's the beginning of empathy. Curiously enough, theater also does a great job at developing empathy, and it uses the same pathways to do that. So you can also sort of conceptualize shared reading, right, as bringing these characters and these features to life, and developing empathy through that. So that's one of my favorite little known benefits to shared reading. So all of this is wonderful. And we like to think that we are going to, as parents, take all the time in the world to do everything that our children need to become better at school. And I cannot speak for anyone else, but I can say that when I became a parent, I was amazed at how exhausted I was. It is a time in life where you rarely even get 5 minutes to catch your breath. So some of the research that I'm going to share with you now is, in my opinion, the most interesting, because I would have found it difficult to do daily an activity that had such intangible benefits. And so when we talk about parents and helping them understand what the benefits are, this study in 2020, looking at the Smart Beginnings program, they took a shared reading intervention to low socioeconomic parents when they had babies that were 6 months old. Half of the parents took part in the intervention, half did not. The authors of the study asked the parents for self-report data, and they had them observed by graduate students, not just during the shared reading, but also during a playtime. And what they found was that the parents who had taken part in the shared reading intervention showed increases in both self-report and observed behaviors in sensitivity to their child's needs, in beneficial and interactions, and they both reported and showed lower parental stress. And this was both reported and observed at 9 months and then again at 18 months because of a short intervention in shared reading at 6 months. So I love this because this takes the benefits beyond the sort of theoretical and puts them in an everyday context. How can this help you today? A similar study, Fragile Families, this one came out of Australia in 2019, found that shared reading at ages 1 and 3 predicted less harsh parenting at ages 3 and 5. And their medial variable in here was the child disruptive behavior. So no one has put the research together yet, but it does kind of make sense, right? If the parent is feeling less stress, if you're having more beneficial interactions, if the child is feeling heard and also learning how to communicate with that shared point of reference, then the child is learning to ask for what they need, and the parent is more receptive when they ask, and the disruptive behaviors become less. And therefore, the parenting increases along a more positive line. So both of these I find really, really interesting. And then we extend this into what do the schools see in these children? And we see that the children are more likely to exhibit better pro-social skills at age 5 and 6. They are exhibiting more social competence and attention. And the reading for enjoyment continues all the way up to about age 13, which again brings in that quietness and ability to calm yourself down. So there are benefits to literacy. There are also benefits to the child's communication skills. There are benefits to their behavior, and there are benefits to their ability to sit and do something quietly, all the way through up to age 13, which is a really strong argument, I think, for parents for taking this time to learn this behavior and then practice this behavior every day. So one of the things that I wanted to look at in my work is, can we sort of scale this up? And so both of these studies were done on the nonprofit Reach Out and Read, and they were looking at, can you actually make a difference school-wide? If you have a shared reading intervention, we know it can positively impact the child. We know it can positively impact the family. Can we take it up to a whole school level of impact? And so what the 2014 study showed is that you can absolutely increase shared reading behavior. And this is where this becomes an influenceable behavior. So thinking about, can we actually make the change? Can we help parents to exhibit more of this behavior? And they found that we can, that there are interventions out there that can help increase this behavior. And then the 2016 study looked at a school-wide, a group of school-wide studies, and they found that children can reliably be seen to enter kindergarten with stronger vocabulary and stronger oral language skills when they have had more shared reading interventions and more shared reading in the home. So they are finding that we can sort of raise that floor of where we are, and that's at the school level. So my research looking at this is thinking about community-wide effects. Can we take this out to an entire district? And so I'll walk you through what these two charts show. This is a set of districts, District A and District C. They are in Virginia, where I am from. And in Virginia, we are lucky enough to have had for a very long time a test called PALS. And it is the Phonemic Awareness Literacy Screener. And it has been given to all incoming kindergartners for a very long time. So we get good longitudinal data from this. Knowing that we had this data, we had 2 districts in my area who started the Imagination Library intervention in their communities. And they wanted to see if their money and their time was actually making a difference. And so when we look at this chart, the first set of dots on the chart are the baseline. And in PALS, what they report is the percent of kids who are not meeting the benchmark. So what percent of children are not ready for kindergarten, according to PALS? So a higher line is worse, a line that's increasing is worse. What you want to see is a lower level and you want to see that level decreasing over time. So I was able to look at these two districts, and each one served as its own control because they started the intervention at different times. So you'll notice the first one has 3 years of baseline data. And then from there, we extrapolated out a trend line. This is what you would expect to see based on the data that we have. And they started their intervention in the summer of 2007. So you can see they had a drop in the percentage of kids who were identified as at risk, and also that the trend line drawn across it flattens out. So that was a nice result that we found. If we look at District C, we did the same approach. They started their intervention in the summer of 2008. So they had 4 years of baseline, and you can see the trend line is increasing, and there's a great deal of variability in their baseline. So some years they had as little as 20% of kids who were identified as being at risk, and other years they were up to 30%. And so the interesting part of this data is that you see a corresponding drop, right? The levels go down to about that 20% mark to stay, but you also see the trend line even out, and you see that variability even out. So it becomes a little more consistent. So this is 2 small studies in one state with one intervention, and more data is definitely needed, but it does do a nice job of showing you that there can be a district-wide effect to intervening in the early years and increasing this amount of shared reading. So where are we now? So I'm going to remind you that those trend lines in our very first graph were flat across the parent education levels since 1993. And then I'm going to show you recent data for incoming kindergartners. And in this study, they looked at what level of, what percent of kids are on track. And this one used the Dibbles measuring system. So this is particular to pandemic years, right? So looking at 2019, 2020, about half of our kids would have been considered to be on track coming into kindergarten. During the pandemic year, we were looking at 37%. The following year, we were looking at 47%. From this, the author makes the recommendation that we need to be doing more shared reading in the home. It is a lever that we can pull to help increase these percentages of kids who are incoming to kindergarten on track and ready to learn to read. And it's one that they recommend that we make more of. The American Academy of Pediatrics came to a similar conclusion, and this was all the way back in 2014. And their statement was that everyone in the community needs to be doing more to encourage shared reading and to make sure that all kids have are coming into kindergarten on track and have access to books and have a history of shared reading before they hit kindergarten. So what are the 2 factors that go into this? The first factor is parent engagement and motivation. And so again, that's where we get to on the chart. This is a behavior that can be influenced. When parents know the extent of the benefits to their child for shared reading, they change their behavior and they read with their child more often. And we've seen this in study after study. So the number one factor that you can control is getting this information out there, reminding them if they think that they already know. This is something that you can do that is going to pay dividends for your child down the road. This is where the updated data on what it does for the parent immediately here today in terms of the parental satisfaction and lower stress levels and more beneficial interactions, all of that can be added into the idea of this benefits your child later to this helps you parent today. And so parent engagement and motivation will go up when that information is shared. The other piece of it is ownership and access to print materials. And one of the things that Lindsay showed in 2010 was that across the US, kids in lower SES neighborhoods have less ownership of books, they have less access to print materials. Libraries are less well stocked and they're less easy to get to and easy for the children to use. And so ownership and access to print materials becomes the second factor in reading aloud to kids and sharing reading across birth to age 5. And so most of the interventions that we talk about will encourage some kind of ownership and access to print materials, along with helping the parents to understand the benefits so that they are more engaged and motivated. So that is my look at this, and I want to take it back to the idea of this is one of the levers that we have to pull, right? So in Virginia, we are working through some new initiatives at a state level that are talking about the curriculum, that are talking about how teachers teach. They are talking about bringing parents in and developing reading plans. And one of the pieces of advice that I would have is don't wait. Don't leave this particular aspect of developing literate children to wait until they get to school. There should be equal emphasis on shared reading in the homes. And so I just want to take that back to the very beginning. It's one of the big places that we have, and you saw those flat trend lines. We can still be making increases in those. So this is one of my absolute favorite areas to talk about, and I appreciate you sitting and listening and allowing me to share it. And I'm sharing my email with you. So if you have any questions or if you want to follow up or would really like to see one of the articles, please email me and I'd be happy to chat with you. Thanks so much.
This was exceptional. Thank you so much, Dr. Sullivan. Man, there was so much goodness in there, so many great takeaways. And I think for me, the biggest thing is I walk away from this conversation, this learning experience, feeling excited, feeling hopeful, feeling encouraged, right? Seeing so many possibilities. So I thank you so much for all of the information that you shared. It solidifies that what we are doing here in the schools and what we're doing with Just Right Reader really mirrors many of the best practices that you gave and shared. And we have so many things. Now, listen, I reminded you guys in the housekeepings that if you had questions to drop them in the chat, and I'm seeing a few coming into the Q&A, so that's great. If you have questions, go ahead and enter them now into the Q&A. And then we're going to create some time for Dr. Sullivan to answer and speak to those questions. So while you're sending your questions to the Q&A, I want to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about Just Right Reader and our newest product, right? It's something that I am so proud of and so excited about. At Just Right Reader, we aim to be the game changer in early elementary literacy and instruction. And as the pioneer publishing company in this science of reading space, we have transformed how reading is taught in pre-K to 12th grade. But today, we learned a lot about the importance of even beginning earlier. So I want to share with you our latest innovation and just let you see what we are doing for the future of literacy instruction. So Just Right Reader is dedicated to revolutionizing literacy and ensuring that every child has the foundation they need to succeed. And Dr. Sullivan just emphasized for us the crucial need to begin literacy development at a very early age. And Dr. Hutton, who is a researcher that we work very closely with, he echoes those same thoughts. And he says that it isn't just babies' bodies that are growing in these first years. He says that baby's brain is developing even more rapidly. Interactions with parents and caregivers are essential to the language development. We heard that in the research that we just learned about. And we also heard the same thing, that it is best, the best place to start is reading aloud every day for at least 15 minutes. When? Right from birth. And this is really where Just Right Reader came in and really said, let's be a part of the solution. Let's be a part of that connection that Dr. Sullivan said about getting books into the hands of children. Let's be the solution to getting the books in the hands of parents. And we crafted a new kind of board book, right? We crafted a new kind of board book with research-backed developmental milestones for the first 3 years of life, and they are at the core. Now, while other books for infants, they try to clump a bunch of skills together, ours are built for each specific developmental stage. And we have done the research along with our researchers, and our books are really very, very special. And I can't wait to show them to you. So they are, Just Right Reader is for each developmental stage. We have them that are big ideas for today's caregivers to make sure that there is a wealth of research and that our caregivers are responsive to their children in those early years. And we want to make it easy because our unique collection aims to bring the best practices to life so that we can give caregivers easy, actionable, and enjoyable ways to support their children's development. And then we take it even a step further outside of the book because we have Learn Together guides that make these special moments take them out into the world so that this is happening ongoing and consistently. Let's take a look at how we are doing that. So we have books that have engaging stories based on developmental milestones for our children. So for instance, for students, for babies, I'm a teacher. Y'all are going to hear me say students all the time. But for babies 0 to 12 months, we have engaging stories like Tummy Time. And Tummy Time is a book that not only teaches parents about the importance of tummy time and how to work with their babies, but also has engaging photographs that the babies can get involved in, and they can see themselves and they can see representation. So it's a two-way street where parents can have conversations with their babies. And then for ages 12 to 24 months, we have books like You Are Amazing. And then we have books from 24 to 36 months that allow students to allow babies to now begin to play games and interact and have that dialogic interaction that Dr. Sullivan and the research is really encouraging us to do. And everything is rooted in the Head Start 5 domains, right? So one of the things that I notice when we look at our competition, when we look at other board books out there, is that these board books are really focusing on the big, beautiful stories that we enjoyed reading, right? I love Brown Bear, What Do You See, right? I love those books, but when we really look at them, we recognize that these are kindergarten specific books that are great for those age groups, and they're just broken down and turned into a board book. But we have done something different. We have actually looked at the Head Start domains and really tried to make board books that are appropriate for every age and developmental stage. So we have books in the 0 to 12 library that are focused on these Head Start domains. And then we have books in our 12 to 24 month library that are focused on those specific domains. And then we have books in 24 to 36 month library that are focused on those Head Start domains. And these collections allow us to really pinpoint and highlight what our babies need to really develop in those areas, and what our parents need to understand and learn to support their babies in those areas as well. So there's some really cool things in our books that we've taken it to the next level, right? We have some big ideas on the back of the book. And then in each one of our books, we also are teaching baby sign. Now, baby sign language is a fantastic way for parents to be able to reduce frustration and communicate with their babies at a young age so that there's more language development taking place. But sometimes we hear these great ideas and we want to do them. We have a great idea, but we as parents just don't know. So every one of our books has a QR code on the back that allows parents to scan it from the comfort of their homes and watch a quick video of two professionals who are working alongside parents to teach them about the topic in the book, as well as the baby sign of the day. And that allows for parents to feel like they are supported in what they're doing. And we have that both in English and in Spanish. Let me show you what that video looks like. Welcome. Today, we are going to build your baby's emotional awareness with the book, My Feelings. From the start, babies feel so much. These emotions can be intense and can change fast, leading to those "what's happening" moments for parents. Help your baby understand their feelings. Teach them simple words to describe the way they feel. Here's a fun way to do this. Make faces at each other. That's right. Guess each other's feelings by looking at each other's facial expressions. Remind your little one that emotions are a part of life and all feelings are okay. Being able to recognize and name emotions is the first step in building empathy for one another. Just Right Reader's book, My Feelings, is a playful way to explore feelings. Cozy up and read together. Ask your little one how they're feeling and share your feelings too. Research shows that reading is one of the very best things you can do to grow your baby's brain. And check this out. Each of our books includes a baby sign on the back page. Signing with your baby helps you communicate and can reduce frustration. Let's practice the baby sign of the day. Today's sign is hurt. Take both hands and form them in a fist with your index fingers extended. Now point them towards each other and twist them in opposite directions. Hurt. Let's try that together. Hurt. You can do this in whatever area hurts. Hurt. Hurt. You did it. It's just that easy. Now, go practice exploring feelings with your baby. And remember to talk, read, sing, play, and most importantly, love. Your baby's brain thanks you. It's like our secret sauce, right? It is the video that really supports what's taking place in our board books so that parents and children together can enjoy the experience. I want us to walk through what happens also with our books, because we have the books, we have the videos, and then we also have a support guide that it also helps our parents be able to understand what they can do beyond the book. I'm super excited because I get to take you through one of my favorite books that is called I Can Do It. Now, in this book, let me see if I can flip through the pages. Well, I'll try to flip through the pages, but this book is so cute because it allows us to see all of the different things our baby can do. And then it encourages parents to do those things with their baby. Like, can you do it? I can do it. Can you do it? And engaging in that dialogic reading that we heard so much about. The last thing I want to say is that this is an opportunity for us to imagine all of the ways that these books, these things can help us, right? Imagine all of the ways that we could use this resource to guide our parents and help our children and help our students prepare for literacy as they enter into school. Are you ready to engage and equip every child, every family, and all educators? If you are, I want you to just right now practice the baby sign of the day. The baby sign of the day is yes. Did you enjoy this? Are we all on the same page? Did Dr. Sullivan really inspire us and encourage us? I agree. So let's check out some of our questions. I saw a bunch, but I also saw Dr. Sullivan answering some of the questions in the chat as well. I'm just going to highlight some of them for those who are on the recording or who will be going over to listening to the replay, because I think some of those questions would be really, really helpful. So if I can ask Dr. Sullivan if she could jump back on for just a minute so that we can get some of these questions answered for our audience who will be watching the replay, just to kind of answer some of those questions that came through, because I think they are really, really, really important. Thank you for doing all of that and helping in the helping those questions. Let me see if I can find them again. Uh-oh. I think one of the questions that was asked was, can you repeat why this would be based on the mother's educational level? I think that that was such a powerful question, and I think that I want to hear the answer to that too.
Yes, yes. So that's an excellent question to ask. And it, from my point of view, as someone who always had a full-time job while I was being a mom, seems a little unfair, right? Because it almost goes back to the presupposition that it is the moms who are in the home. And so taking that sort of out of that frame, what we know is that it is the mother's education level that influences a lot of the academic behaviors that happen in the home. And that's true even if the mom is not in the home, only being the primary caregiver, right? That it seems to be that indicates everything from how often you read to how you approach oral language development to problem solving. Do you have puzzles in your home? Do you encourage the kids to draw with sidewalk chalk? All of those types of things come down to the mother's education level being that medial variable. And I hope that we'll adopt somewhat more gender neutral, gender non-assumptive language and be
Right.
able to say just the caregiver. But for right now, that is where we are with that variable.
Wonderful. Another question says that a question that's always big on our minds is, how do caretakers balance screen time and shared reading? What are your thoughts about audiobooks or video books? Like, that's always a big question for me. I have 3 daughters, and that's always like a big question for me.
It's a huge question. And the American Academy of Pediatrics actually just changed their guidelines a couple of years ago. And it was a huge scandal because they have always said absolutely no electronics. And they are now saying you can use electronics responsibly, and it can be a beneficial piece of that child development. I tend to stick with what they say. I think birth to age 2, I want to really limit that. simply because I don't want to set the habit, right? It's such an easy electronic babysitter. And I certainly used it, and I have no value judgments on anyone else using it. There are times it's great. But if you can put that off and use mostly print books 0 to age 2, and then pick the pieces of video books or ebooks or apps that go along with the books that you already have in print, then it becomes a powerful tool to use. And I think that balance may be a little different for each family, but I think finding that middle ground is the most important thing.
Yeah, I like the idea of balance and finding the middle ground. There's one more question. I think it's a great question because I think this is really the question everybody has on mind. Are there any grants that schools and communities can use to aid building their home libraries, right? When we think about Just Right Reader and the board books, how do we get these books in the hands of students? What are the ways and creative ways that might be out there to help support this initiative?
Yeah, so that's also a great question, right? Because that's where everything meets. Okay, we know we need to do this. So, how do we get this underway? And in my community, the most successful programs started local. And they started with things like the United Way local chapter, or they started with the Rotary group, which is huge in my town. I don't know if it's huge in everyone's town. Those are entities that enjoy partnering with schools or preschools or community groups and helping out the community. And then you can go for sort of the bigger entities. So I did a quick Google search, and there's a million places you can look for grants for building home libraries. But my best advice would be to start local, show that you can get some money, show that you're implementing it responsibly, have some data showing that it's being used well and that it's actually helping your kids before you go for one of the big grants. I think the big granting entities look more favorably on your proposal if you start out with local money.
That's great advice. That's really great advice. This has been a wonderful learning experience for me. I am a mom. I have 3 daughters. They're not babies anymore, but I know how I felt as a young mom, as a mom who was trying to get it all right and really start our kids off on a good path. And then as an educator, how much I appreciated those students who would come to my classroom with some foundation. And I think together we can really begin to move the needle and really begin to see that trending data change, right? Change. So thank you so much for being here. For all of you who are in the audience, the virtual audience, for all of you who will read, come back and watch again, I want to thank you for your time. If you have questions, if you want to get in touch with anyone from the Just Right Reader team to share with you what we have in these board books and all of the amazing things we're doing, please reach out to us at justrightreader.com. Continue to reach out to Dr. Sullivan. We're so grateful for your work and for your time. So to all of you all, thank you so much for being with us and happy reading. Bye.